So last week we talked about how Paul had been imprisoned in Caesarea near Jerusalem. He had been arrested in Jerusalem, almost killed by the Jews, rescued by the Romans. Because he was a Roman citizen, he was taken to Caesarea. And the only reason he was kept in prison there was because first Felix and then Festus wanted to please the Jews, and keeping Paul in prison pleased the Jews. And so they kept him in prison. And then Paul appealed to Caesar. He said that he wanted the court of Caesar in Rome, all the way over here. He wanted that court to hear his case to be determined whether he was innocent or not. Well, there was a much better likelihood of him being released over here because there weren't many Jews that lived in Rome versus Jerusalem that was originally all Jewish. And so he wanted to go to Rome. Now, as you can see, that's a long ways away from here to here. This is the Mediterranean Sea. And in Paul's travels up to this point, he had traveled all up in here in the place they called Asia, and up in here, which was Greece. But he hadn't gone over to Italy, to Rome. So this would be a new thing for Paul. So Paul was sent by ship with other prisoners and guards to Rome in Italy, which is the projection of land that looks like a boot in the Mediterranean Sea. And a centurion, now remember, a centurion is a soldier who's in charge of 100 other soldiers. A centurion was in charge of guarding the prisoners on this boat. And the centurion's name was Julius. Now Festus, who was the governor at that time at Caesarea, who he was the one who had kept Paul in prison. Festus told Julius that Paul actually hadn't broken any Roman laws. He was only a prisoner because of some religious Jewish laws. And so Julius respected Paul, which turned out to be a very good thing. Now, unfortunately, when they set sail, it just turned out to be really late in the year. So this was the kind of boat they would have sailed on. I'll hold it close so you can see it. It was late in the year, so winter was coming. And so they knew they needed to get as far as they could before the bad weather hit, because winter would bring wild winds and storms. So the weather wasn't good for sailing. At first, there was no wind to speak of, so they were going really slowly, which wasn't good when you're trying to beat winter to get to Rome before winter. They were taking too long, and they knew that bad weather was coming. Well, they came to a harbor in the island of Crete. So you can see how they left Caesarea, and they did manage, they were going close to the shoreline to avoid the windy areas in the middle of the Mediterranean. So they were just kind of going along close to the shoreline, and they came to the island of Crete there. They're about, looks like about maybe halfway, and they stopped at Fair Havens. It was a very small place, and when they got there, Paul suggested that they just stay there for the winter. It was getting pretty late. But the owner of the boat, he wanted to push on and get as far as he could. He wanted to stop in a more suitable place. The place they were at, that Fair Haven, was not very big, and they had a lot of people on their boat, so they kept on going. Well, when a nice mild south wind blew, which is usually a warmer wind, not as strong, the owner of the boat set sail. But it didn't take very long before that wind changed and a terrible storm caught the ship. And the people on the ship did their best to save the ship by throwing things overboard to lighten it in the water, to make it go up higher in the water and avoid running aground. So they didn't want to hit the ground that was underneath the water, so they lightened the boat to bring it up higher. They were in this storm for many days. And the men were so frightened and so busy trying to save the ship that they didn't even eat in all that time. Now, Paul, he watched all this going on and he kept silent for as long as he could, but then he spoke and he said, "Sirs, you should have listened to me when I told you that we should stay at the last port. But now don't worry. Everyone will be saved except the ship. I know, because an angel from my God came and told me that I would stand before Caesar and you would all be safe. So don't worry. I believe God." So God had sent an angel to Paul and told him all of this. Well, after 14 days, that's 2 weeks of this dreadful storm and being afraid that they were all going to die, after 14 days, the shipmen found that the water was getting shallower. But it was night, so they couldn't see where the land was. They were going to put out a little boat to leave the ship, but Paul stopped them. He said, "Unless you stay in the ship, you won't be safe." So they cut the boat away. They had started to listen to Paul. He was still a prisoner, but he was becoming a leader. So Paul convinced them all to eat for the first time in 14 days to get their strength back. He knew they needed their strength for what was going to happen. There was 276 people on this ship. Well, when it was daytime, they looked and they saw the land and a place to try to get the boat in. So they sailed there, but on the way, the ship ran aground and broke apart. The soldiers, they were going to kill all the prisoners. Remember that Roman law? A soldier who was guarding someone could not let that person get away or they would die. So they were going to kill all the prisoners to keep them from escaping. But the centurion, the one who was in charge of them all, he liked Paul. He did not want anything to happen to Paul. He wanted to save him. So he stopped his soldiers from killing all the prisoners. And he told them all to jump in the water and try to get to shore. So they all jumped in the water and they found pieces of wood and things from the ship floating in the water and they floated to the shore. Everyone escaped safely, just as Paul had said, just as the angel had said. So, then what? They all escaped. They all came up on the shore. It was a little island that they had landed on. And the little island was called Melita. Okay. The people who lived on this island were very kind, and they met these poor saved sailors and prisoners coming into the water, and they tried to help them. They were very kind. They built a big fire, and Paul, he was going to help too. He went to get some sticks to put on this fire. However, there was a poisonous snake that they called a viper that lived on this island, and it just so happened that in the pile of sticks that Paul collected, one of these vipers was in the pile. So when Paul took it to the fire, the viper came out of the fire and bit him. Well, when the people of the island saw this, they knew that Paul would be poisoned and he would die. They figured, because of their superstitions, they figured that Paul must be something really horrible, like a murderer, for this to happen. And they figured that since he had escaped death by escaping from the ship, that fate was going to kill him this way, by making the snake bite him. So they watched him really closely. They watched him to see how he would swell up and die. But even though they watched for a long time, it didn't happen. So when Paul didn't die, the villagers, the people of this island, they changed their mind about Paul. They decided he was not a murderer or an evil, horrible person. He must be a god. Well, something else happened on this island. There was a man, a very important man on the island, who had taken in some of the people from the ship let them stay at his house, and he got very sick. So Paul went and he prayed for him and laid his hands on him, and the man got better. And then the people were so excited about this. They started to bring other people with illnesses and things. They came to Paul and they were healed as well. So I'm sure that Paul took that opportunity to tell the people of this little island of Melita about God and about salvation through Jesus Christ. So it was good for them to land there. God brought good out of evil, the evil being the ship breaking, and the good being that people heard the gospel and could be saved. Well, after 3 months of living on this island, another ship came along and they were able to continue on. And they finally made it to Rome. When they got to Rome, the prisoners were all delivered to the prison, but Paul, because he hadn't legally actually done anything against the Roman laws, Paul was allowed to live by himself with his own guard. And he was able to have friends come and visit him, and he was able to meet people. And we will talk more about that next time. We'll find out what happened to Paul next time. Thanks. Bye.